I'd really like to thank young African professionals tonight for their support with this event. And lastly, I'll just note a few events that are coming up as well that might be of interest to people here tonight. This Sunday, Aminata Forna, who I'll get back to in just a moment, is going to be speaking at our Connecticut Avenue store at 5 p.m. for her new novel, Happiness. And she's actually right here in the audience. I'm going to be quoting from you in just a moment, if that's okay. We'll just start with that, actually. I think we're good. So this Sunday, she'll be at our Connecticut Avenue location. In a review for the Washington Post in 2006, Aminata Forna said of Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o's novel Wizard of the Crow that in it he has turned the power of storytelling into a weapon against totalitarianism. That novel, as steeped in the realities of politics as all of his work, was told in the language of legend, which is only fitting because Ngũgĩ himself is something of a living legend for his novels, beginning with the release of Weep Not Child in 1964, for his decision to move from English language writing to his native tongue of Gikuyu, a subject covered greatly in his landmark essay collection, Decolonizing the Mind. And as related in the memoir he will be speaking on shortly, for his year as a political prisoner some 40 years ago, imprisoned without trial following the production of his play I Will Marry When I Want in 1977. Wrestling with the Devil, a memoir of his time as a prisoner, was originally released in 1982, but Ngũgĩ is now bringing it to a U.S. audience for the first time. He's currently a distinguished professor of English and comparative literature at the University of California, Irvine. But tonight, it is my distinct honor to welcome him to Politics and Prose at the Wharf. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.
I just come from Amherst, where from California, from my house, went to the plane to Amherst, thinking of being eastern version of California. But the opposite in this case, actually snowing, and not snowing, but there's an arrow of rain, which is very cold, and it's literally, they are little arrows, and you try to hide your face, you do this, and so for 2 days I was under attack daily. When I came back to California, my throat was a little bit dry. So let me start by saying how glad I am to be back here to Politics and Prose. I always confuse it, and sometimes talk of prose politics, but it's politics and prose. But I was at the other location, which is slightly outside the central area, and now I come back. I'm in this extreme, very posh area, very impressed, yeah. But anyway, the key connection is the book, yeah. Let me also, I had some friends, I had some friends who are my neighbors. I was told they would be here. I want to by introducing you. Sachiko, Pietro. Oh, there. Oh, I've been looking for you. Okay, please stand up. Wait, it's always good to see neighbors, please, Pietro. They are my neighbor. We are family friends, and it's it's wonderful to see you. Of course, you've been introduced to Aminata Forna, happiness. Yeah, so you need a bit of happiness or a lot of happiness. Huh? She is all the answer. Happiness. I was actually I was just reading the opening chapter. How do you know so much about hunting?
Well, that's a long story.
Huh?
From being in New England, not too far.
Huh.
From Williams College.
Oh, I see. Wait a minute. Yeah. Very impressive. I look forward to reading the rest, but it's really incredible. Those hunting scenes in 18th, I know, something else, yeah. And then I was very lucky that on just entering here, imagination is a wonderful thing. We shall get. I met friends. what I call my Ugandan connection. Yeah, they were at Makerere College, and I'm a graduate of Makerere College. And then there was, and then what's your name again? Huh? Middleman. Okay. And then he was also a Makerere, both as a student and also as a professor, And so we were speaking Kiswahili and Luganda. So I spoke Luganda for the first time in I don't know how many years. So it was so nice, frankly, to go back memory lane. Yeah. So it's a good bookshop. So today I'm going to read from, mainly from from Wrestling with the Devil, which is my memoir of prison, but reissued. I first published it in 1982, I believe, under the title Detained, a writer's prison diary, Then I went to England in 1982 to launch the London edition. When I was there, I learned that on my return to Kenya, they were going to put me in prison again, or worse, what they called red carpet welcome at the airport. So I became shipwrecked, literally, in London. And so in some ways, this memoir has something to do with my being about my actual prison in Kenya in 1977, December 77 to December 78, and also my exile. And I've been in a kind of exile ever since, although now, to be very open and correct, I can return to Kenya without a red carpet welcome, with a just normal human welcome. Yeah, thank you. So what I did was, in the previous edition, there's a lot of documentation, because as you'll see, many prison memoirs as a journal always contain also a lot of documentation, because as if you're trying to make a case against imprisoning authorities, against in front of the world, so to speak. This is why, this what, when, these are my letters from prison, these are the documents they said I had or didn't have, and so on. But I found that a lot of that's a little bit dated now in terms of their historical, immediate relevance, because the main part of my narrative was really the act of writing a novel in prison as an act of resistance. It was very, very important to me. It's also, in the novel, which is called Wrestling with the Devil on the Cross, also ironically became the first modern novel in Gikuyu language. And some of the thoughts which I had in prison at the time about the language issue later became what the book Decolonizing the Mind, which is probably now the text which probably is better known in the world about me. And sometimes I was in India recently, and everywhere, crowds. But what text were they talking about? Decolonizing the mind. And of course, as a novelist, I was a little bit jealous of the theoretical. Can they say that I'm also the writer of Wizard of the Crow? or Wizard of the Crow, or Hypno Child? Anyway, but it's all connected. So I've reissued this memoir, really focusing more on the section that talks about resistance, or imagination, or art, as resistance, imagination, it's very imagination, because art is a product of, art is a product of imagination. That's true, right? All art, that is, but art also nourishes the imagination, just like the food needs nourishment from food, but the body needs nourished by food, the soul nourished by all the moral authorities, whatever form, biblical, Quranic, or Torah, or whatever, or mythological, the soul, whatever it is. I used to think it was here until that guy from South Africa, St. Bernard, said transplanting hearts, and that's ruined my my conception of where the soul was. Yeah? I used to think the heart and the soul were somewhere located in the same space. But imagination, which in so many ways is what makes us as human beings, it's sort of, it's impossible to think of anything we do as human beings without the aid of imagination. Whether it's the buildings we create, we first of all imagine them in the head, and then try to realize them in fact. Whether also means traveling. People talk about time travel, and it's always, in a way, when you come to think of it, it's amusing because we do already have time travel. We travel back in time every single day and every single minute. Like we can be here this second and be here, and still, let's say, you and I can quickly see. If I mention the word Kampala, it will flash in your mind, and we are here. If I say Makerere, you see it quickly, and we are back here, If I say breakfast this morning, or everybody, and we are still here, we'll actually go there and look around and come back, within seconds. So we do actually, in reality, we do a lot of time travel, including projections for the future, like when you imagine the day of resurrection, or you can imagine heaven to come, and that kind of space. Some even draw pictures of heaven they have never actually experienced, and so on. Again, imagination. So that, which is so important to us, is nourished by the arts, even though it's also the arts are a product of imagination. So in this case, I was thinking imagination helped me to break through the barriers of imprisonment. So let me just read. I'll concentrate on how the novel came into being. If I can, let me see. Because I'm always very fascinated in how artists as a whole, whether musicians or painters, how they come to paint one thing or that piece of music. How do they put it together? When I meet a musician, how are you able to put something, music, without words, and still feel good to the ear? And it goes on and on and on. And except for a few phrases that repeat each other consciously, every piece, every section is slightly different from the other. How did that come to be? I asked the same thing of a fellow novelist, because different people have different approaches, and I'm always very, very curious. So this is how I came to write Devil on the Cross. I'll now start not with my arrest, which was midnight of December 31st. That, I don't know where, that midnight, between 30th and that 1st. So I was technically arrested a minute before midnight. And a minute after midnight, I was a prisoner. And I was not taken to trial. Literally, I was taken from my home to a maximum security prison, the biggest prison in Kenya or Africa for that matter. And it was, yeah. And this was basically in connection with a play in English, Ngahika Deda in Gikuyu, but in English, I'll marry when I want, which we performed with village men and women, working people, factory workers, plantation workers, landless, and we performed it in their own language. Because when you come to think of it, it's ridiculous that I think as an educated African, I can go, and I think I'm very committed to work with the people, and I want big development ideas. But when I go there, I cannot say them in the language that people speak. I had to get an interpreter, like the colonial authorities used to have, an interpreter. So, or more ridiculous, to go to a village and say, we won't develop theater in this village. Yeah? We shall do it, of course, in English. It's really ridiculous. So we did it in the language. So it's we who came from the university who had to adjust. Okay? And by then I was chair of the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi. I was a published author of 4 novels, The River Between, Weep No Child, A Grain of Wheat, and Petals of Blood. So by any standards, I was quite well known. Yeah? So the drama here is to be all those things, and then on the following day, a minute before midnight, I was all those things. Huh? A minute after midnight, or when I wake up, I have no name, just a number. Literally, I have no name, a number, and I'm in a maximum security prison. Literally, I don't know how to put it, between the next block was for those condemned to the death row, and the other block was for the mentally challenged, so the worker with words was somewhere in between the two, right? Yeah. So how the first few weeks, I was put in what I found other political prisoners, but the first few weeks I was in what they call internal segregation. By that I mean you are with other people, but they are not allowed to speak to you, and you cannot speak to them. It's really, I can tell you, it's a very big punishment to be with people and you cannot speak to them, and you want to, and they want to speak to you, okay? And you cannot do it. It makes you feel even more isolated, I suppose, than if you are literally alone, because then you can say, actually, now I'm alone. But now you're alone in the company of other people. Although I must say that the other political prisoners were very clever, and although they were not allowed to talk to me, since they could talk to themselves, they would stand at a safe distance and talk very loudly among themselves and giving each other advice. But since they had already been there, I assumed the advice they were giving was to me, how to cope with prison, okay? Yeah. But what then happens is that a kind of anger accumulates, a frustration, a kind of anger I use, and the first victim of my anger was the prison chaplain, who one morning came into my cell staggering under the weight of 2 huge Bibles, the Living Bible in English, and Ifukuriagai, the Holy Bible in Gikuyu, plus a bundle of revivalist tracts from the American millionaire rich evangelical missions, people here don't realize how the hold the evangelical community has on Africa is so strong, because so they take every single word literally. Okay, it was bad then. I'm sure it's worse now. He was in a prison officer's uniform of khaki trousers and jumper coat with aluminium buttons and a decoration of 2 or 3 stones on the shoulder flaps. He also carried the hallmark of all prison officers and warders, a cord over the left shoulder, carrying a whistle hidden in the breast pocket. Underneath these symbols of oppression, he wore the holy uniform of a reverend, a black cloak with a white collar around the neck. I held my tongue and let him talk to me. Sometimes, he said, after sitting on the edge of the desk seat with me on the bed, God chastises us for our own good. Take Mau Mau, for instance. Mau Mau was the liberation movement that brought us independence. Take Mau Mau, for instance. And my brother was part of that movement. He was a guerrilla fighter. Take Mau Mau, for instance. Mau Mau was God's scourge with which he lashed Kenyans to teach them a good lesson. The fruit of this lesson, well learned, is the stability we now enjoy and which is the envy of our neighbors. He's talking about the post-colonial situation in a Kenya whose independence was won through armed struggle, and he's castigating that armed struggle that brought about the very independence we were enjoying. I could hardly believe my ears. KLFA, the Kenya Land Freedom Army, or Mau Mau, as the British called the soldiers of liberation, who, with their sacrifice and courage, wrote the most glorious chapter in our nation's long history of struggle, was to this man with the cloak of a priest beneath a prison officer's uniform, a huge whip or shambok with which God flagellated Kenyans into humble submission to his eternal will. We have all sinned and come short of the glory of God, he said. Who knows? Maybe this is a unique God-created chance for you to meet with Christ. He went on, God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. He did not see the anger seething inside me. In my silence, he could see only a being about to be smitten on the ground by the thunderbolt of the Lord, like Saul in the New Testament. You know, Saul. But to me, his attempts at the verbal comfort sounded like a prayers of thanksgiving for being chosen to be the earthly instrument of God's mysterious ways of performing his wonders. And his attempts at converting me were trumpets of victory over a fallen foe of imperialist Christendom. My silence lured him on. He now pressed me with the 2 Bibles. He now presented me with the 2 Bibles. The Bible is the only book in the world contained within its hardcovers, a complete library, he said, fingering each Bible lovingly as he placed it on the desk. 66 books in one. How many people can boast of a home library that big? He then handed me 2 religious tracts, one of which was, I think, God's City in Heaven, or some such title, with obvious awe at the American manufactured weightless leaves of holiness. Despite my mounting anger, I beat a hasty retreat from his verbal onslaught and actually took the leaves, or the leaves of holiness. I really felt weak before the moral certainty of a man who had walked the same path over and over again, and hence knows every sharp corner and dangerous bend, every nook and brook on the way. A man who knows clearly from years of experience where this path leads to. A prisoner's acceptance to carry the cross forever without a murmur of discontent, because he now has the spiritual satisfaction of having Christ for a personal Savior. The visit had been beautifully timed. For over 2 weeks now, I had not engaged in any debate, any talk. Indeed, I had hardly talked to anyone at any length since the night I was abducted from home. I had been denied human company. At the time of his visit, all the older political prisoners, except one, Martin Shikuku, had gone to another prison to meet detainees review tribunal. So I was totally alone for those weeks. I felt as if I were on the run, relentlessly pursued by an invisible, silent, malignant force that, despite my every effort to outdistance it, had finally caught up with me, as it was now transforming me, a free agent, able to make decisions, into a passive creature, panting and cringing for mercy at the feet of the twin warders of body and soul. My hard anger had now melted into a kind of spiritual lethargy and intellectual torpitude. What's the point of talking back? Isn't it easier for me, for everybody, but mostly for me, to buy peace with silence? The priest sensed the uncertainty in his quarry. He now took his spiritual dagger and went for the kill. Let us kneel down and ask God for forgiveness for all our sins, he commanded, but in a voice tear-bathed in infinite pity and compassion. Then suddenly, from somewhere in the depths of my being, rose a strong, rebellious voice that was small but becoming stronger and stronger. It said, "Wake up from your spiritual lethargy and in intellectual torpor. Don't let them drag you with this stuff. Don't let them poison your system with it. It was to make you acutely hunger and thus for compassionate human voice that they have kept you near and yet far from human company. If you let him get away with this, you are going to be his prisoner for the rest of your stay here, and and possibly forever." So out of that, I felt like starting. "Hold it," I cried out. "Who needs your prayers, your Bibles, your leaves of holiness, all manufactured and packed in America? Why do you always preach humility and acceptance of sins to the victims of oppression? Why is it that you never preach to the oppressor?" I'm getting worked up. A few guards crowded the door, but I didn't care. I fled right to its rotten roots, his spiritual dependence on imperial foreigners. What had made him bring me tracts written by Billy Graham? Didn't he know that this was the same man who used to bless American soldiers on their missions to napalm, bomb, murder, and massacre Vietnamese men, women, and children in the name of an anti-communist holy crusade? My denunciatory vehemence shook him a little. He became defensive. The moral certainty had gone. Avoiding the earthly issues of oppression, exploitation, and foreign control, he said that as a man of God, he never indulged in politics. To justify that stand, he quoted biblical exhortation to believers to render unto Caesar things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Well, it happened that I knew my Bible quite well. So I quickly quoted back to him the biblical scene in which Jesus whipped out of God's earthly temple the Pharisees and Sadducees, collaborators with Caesar's oppressive rule. So a little game started. He'd refer me to biblical passages that talked of faith, sin, salvation, grace, and life after death. I would in turn refer him to alternative passages in which God is cited as having sent his prophets to denounce earthly misrule and oppression of innocents. He abruptly cut short the heated exchange. Anyway, we could go on arguing forever, but I have others to see. You, educated people, like arguments too much. But remember, you cannot argue your way to heaven. As it turned out, actually, it's just so black and white, as I learned later when I left. In fact, he had been sent by some friendly voices since he was allowed in prison. I think he was supposed to pass some messages to me, and I begged to him, but my sort of sense of grievance actually ruined everything, as I learned afterwards. So I just want to make sure that that it's not. So some things are not always very neatly so black and white. There are some gray areas, we should be aware of. But this conversation, nevertheless, has still kept on coming back to me. And the next section I want to read is a portrait of some of my political prisoners. Let me see, 172. 175, 172. Yeah. We are a group of us, but we came from not from one political movement, but from different situations. I was a writer, and the others have been involved in one way or another. So it's as if we all were from the same ideological camp. But we were bound together by the fact that we were political prisoners. Now, some of the people I found there, one was what, for the purpose of this, I'll call the military man. Okay. I note that he has been here for 3 years. He keeps to himself. He hardly came out to my door to say hello. But the moment my internal segregation, I was in internal segregation, he didn't talk to me or try to be too like the others. But the moment my internal segregation ends, he befriends me. This intensifies after we discover we both like chess. Chess and checkers are some of the few games allowed. Checkers is the more popular. Some of the prisoners breathe and swear by it. But military man looks down upon it. He was used to a daily chess company of another military officer. The two used to play it with gripping intensity as if they were indeed commanding armies in a battlefield. Beside their military pass, chess was what set them apart. Then the officer was transferred to another prison, so he had nobody to play with until I came. So between the departure of the officer and my arrival on the scene, he has had nobody to play chess with. For military man does not deign to teach the others. Chess becomes a special knowledge that he possesses, and the others, civilians, don't. By the way, for those, prison can be fair. You may think of prison is really so much part of society. You can find all the attitudes and even social division in society literally become reflected also in prison. Almost in small and big ways, Anyway, so we are all in prison, but he looks down upon the others because they are civilians. But you see, I am a little different. Being a professor and a writer compensate for my lack of military background. Plus, I already know how to play chess. And he notices, after a few checkmates, that actually I'm able to outmaneuver him on the chessboard. Initially, some of the others express an interest and the desire to learn, and I teach them the names of the pieces and their moves, much to the chagrin or anger of the little man who likes it that it's a game known to a few. But he's not upset for long. For the moment the others discover that chess is not like checkers, but calls for more concentration, they abandon it one by one. And in the end, only military man and I are left to it, confirming to the military man his view that chess calls for superior minds. At first, the others, even when they do not play, would watch military man and me play. But after time, they don't even stop at our sessions. Later, I learned the rumor that has driven them away. A few even come to me and try to discourage me for my own sanity. Chess and the concentration it calls for, even watching it, they told me, can make one crazy. And they think that military man is a little crazed. Well, for me, I don't care. The military man, regales me with stories, not so much of his actual military experience, but the aura that surrounds it. He hints that he had indeed been a privy to a military plot to overthrow the Kenyatta government at the time. And sometimes he himself was, sometimes he himself was somehow in the thick of it. But he never divulges details of what, who, when, where, and how. But the very lack of details and his mysterious looks make his involvement seem bigger than he was letting on. They would look like that. And then you tell me. The more I listened, the more extraordinary his hints and claims became. Sometimes he would tell me, without details, that he had been trained with the PLO in the Middle East, that he had even met with Arafat. Arafat used to be the leader of PLO. He talked about some of the leading figures in the organization. Just before my incarceration, there had been news of the arrest of 2 Palestinians at Nairobi airport. I knew about that. Now he sought me into secrecy. Then he divulged the secret. They had been sent by the top PLO leadership to rescue him from Kamiti prison. Despite the setback, the plans to spring him from prison were still afoot. His stories make him look larger than life, although this was in contrast to his haggard prison bearing. Then one of their prisoners, Koi, seeing how I was taken up in like my mother, really, my eyes, takes me aside one day, and he tells me, word for word, the stories the military man must have been telling me. What? I wondered, had he been listening? No, it was because he and others had been recipients of those stories before the fallout. It turns out, according to Koigi, that military man has never been in military service, but he happened to be social friends with some in the military, later arrested and detained without trial for being suspected of plotting a coup. The real military officer, the chess partner who came before me, had told on him. He, that's the military man, he is a victim of social contact. At any rate, he was never in the military. But since his imprisonment without trial, he has internalized the military thing. And in his mind, he was really in the military. So I asked, what about his seemingly good knowledge of the PLO and even naming some of the leaders and other actors in the Middle East? Well, apparently there was a time before I came when they were allowed newspapers. And the military man had an incredible memory that retained all the details. He had a way of inserting himself in the stories in a manner that seemed convincing, except that logic dictated the contrary. Plus, the real military officer who had been transferred had told on the truth. Well, what do I do? Actually, I became even more interested in his fiction. He lived in a fantasy in which brave men would eventually rescue him. And when angry with the prison officials, he would hint at some kind of retribution. Whatever it is, the fantasy, I suppose, keeps hope alive. And hope, yes, hope. And one needs hope in this hopeless place. So does it matter, I ask myself, how one gets it, whether from religious faith or in the rightness of one's political beliefs, or in the stories of a military man who sustained the dreams of a giant dramatic rescue? Well, my fantasy turned out to be writing. Okay. So later I tell myself, just to cope, oh, let me tell myself to drink this a little. It's full of honey, actually. So I tell myself, I'll try a diary of life in prison. I'll record everything that happens, what I see, touch, smell, hear, and think. But no matter how hard I try, no words will form on paper. I was never one for writing diaries and records. And when in the past I've tried, I've always had to give it up after one or two false starts. I'm too close to the events for me to see them clearly and to immediately make out what is happening to me. Besides, I find that here at Kamiti, in a certain sense, everything is very ordinary. And prison is very, very ordinary. There's nothing romantic about being in prison. Please, after this, don't be in a hurry to go there, please. Yeah. Well, was an ordinary, for time here is sluggish, space is narrow, and any action is a repetition of similar non-actions that have nothing, that make me that have nothing outstanding to record. Yesterday as today. Is that enough for a diary? And then my arguments with the Reverend keeps on coming back to me. You see, I grew up with the Bible, most of the Old Testament, and most of the characters, Abraham, Isaac, David, Joseph, were my early companions, my village. This was because the Old Testament was one of the earliest section of the Bible to be translated into Gikuyu. So when I learned how to read and write, the only book I had, literally, was the Old Testament. And I talk about this in my memoir, Dreams in a Time of War. So so this was the only book readily available. The Gikuyu language, Old Testament, was the only book available in my language when I was growing up. I enjoyed, and it can be very magical, some real magical moments. Like Jonah surviving 3 days in the belly of a fish. That's really, when you come to think, it's very magical, you know. And I also, literally, I saw similar things in the Indian epic Mahabharata, you know, where people are born out of fishes or whatever, you know. Jonah surviving 3 days in the belly of a fish. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego surviving fiery flames. It's the survival part that is most appealing. But some sections of the New Testament as well, the Sermon on the Mount, John the Baptist surviving his sojourn in the wilderness on, guess what? Honey and wild berries. The devil tempted him to quit. The devil even once dared tempt Jesus. They had wrestled with the devil and emerged stronger from the context. Maybe did the Reverend come to tempt me? I keep on resenting the fact that they, the warders, cannot tell me as a thing about the outside, not even about rain or wind or sunshine. Birds fly far above the walls of prison. I wish they could lend me their wings just for a day. What would I do with the wings? I know. Visit my family, my village, but also what? Oh yes, go to all the houses and offices of those in power, making mischief, or land at caves where they are planning corruption and scatter their plates and knives. You know, it's like a kind of practical jokes. And then back. No. I won't come back. I'll not come back to this confinement. But the fun is in going, making mischief, and coming back at will, and enjoying their foolishness in thinking they can confine me within their man-made walls. But this going and coming is what but this, I realize, going and coming back is what I do night and day. I visit my family. I walk in the streets. My imagination is my wings of glory. I talk about a few other things, but then I realize I need paper, pen, writing material. The warders have plenty. I want to write something. I tell them, I tell them, hinting it might even be a confession. The older political prisoners had told me of the trick. It always works. They told me because that's what they want us to do, confess. And indeed, the chief warder readily complies, gives you a pen, but only a few sheets. Never mind, I can supplement that with, well, what? Toilet paper. Good. The idea, though, eludes me. By the way, this is the piece one of chapter from the on toilet paper. Yeah. It was almost as hard as this, because I think it was I always argue that it was meant to punish us prisoners, I think. But it was very good writing material, I can tell you. I mean, they held the pen very well. But soon, I try one idea, nothing comes. This is what the problem. You really want to write something, and the writers really write, nothing forms. But soon another idea steals in my sleep. It begins to form a shape around a competition among wealthy robbers. Probably not so original. I read something similar in the work of Kim Ji-ha from South Korea, who was also in prison under the Park regime. But the idea strongly appeals to me. On another day, Jesus and the devil come back to my mind. The struggle in the desert. I still wrestle with my arguments with the Reverend. The idea that it was the devil and not Christ who should have been executed on the cross plays in my mind. You see, in my mind, Jesus was an opponent of Roman imperialism, a proponent of the kingdom of the least among us, a visionary who saw the poor, among whom he walked, as inheriting the earth. The devil was an ally of Roman imperialism and its oppressive practices, a self-serving criminal whose followers, exploiters of the poor, have as much a chance of entering heaven as a camel through the eye of the needle. A competition among robbers organized by the devil. But the story still refuses to form. Then one day I want to read that section, but I want to describe it to you. I'll just read a little bit of this because it's very important. I had a turning point, came very unexpectedly. And to put in a context, remember, I'm put in prison for writing a play in Ngũgĩ and having it performed by regular people, okay. And that's why the guards are there. But actually, I learned they don't actually know that's the reason. They think they cannot, I don't believe that it's possible for someone to put in prison because of language matters. So they think and they are very sure there's something deeper. That's why I'm in prison. This language thing is just a pretense. In fact, one day, one of the warders, they think the play thing is just mchezo, as they would say in Kiswahili. Our word for play also means a play thing you do with children. When children, we use the same word for when children play hide and seek. The same word for play in theater type, okay? So they're asking, how can we be in prison for play? That we all play as children. But one day, for some reason, he attacks me, not physically, verbal. He said, the trouble with you, educated people, is that you despise your languages. You don't like talking to ordinary people. But what use is your education if it cannot be shared with your own people? Let me tell you, you may possess all the book education in the world, but it's we, ordinary people in tattered clothes, with bare feet and blistered hands, who have the real knowledge of things. If I was to wear a suit today, you'd see me a different person. But it would not mean that I had suddenly acquired more knowledge and wisdom than I had when wearing tattered clothes. Have you ever seen any European calling himself Mutiso, Kamau, Onyango, Kiplagat, or Simio? Have you seen Europeans abandoning their languages and bothering about our languages? Let me tell you something else. Yes, I may not have book knowledge, but even a child can give you a word that might benefit you. You people, even if you follow Europeans to the grave, they will never, ever let you really know what their language is. They will never, and mark my words, don't look upon a drop of rain, Europeans will never let you into the secrets held by their language. What do you then become? Their slaves. You know, there was irony. Only I could appreciate the irony, because he's preaching at me, and he takes. These are never black and white, because in listening to me, he's taking a class position vis-a-vis me. He's not identified with me with the educated, the ruling class, the ruling whatever, and I'm really. He's not longer the oppressing agent in the prison, but I'm the part of the oppressing group of us, as all of them, right? So, but there's a kind of frankness in his voice that shows much sincerity in holding me and my class responsible for the cultural plight of Kenya. I think he is utterly unconscious of the fact that what he is saying, were he to try and put it into practice, could land him in this very detention block. I say he is genuine in his utter lack of consciousness of the heretical nature of his position on culture, because he is one of the few warders who seem to have been completely cowed by prison and authority. If you asked him about the weather outside, he would shrink back in fear, pleading, "Please don't play fire with my job. It's where I get my daily flour for my children." So in saying this to me, it's probably because he thinks it's a safe subject. Language, culture, education, who cares? So for me, I'm just content to just listen to this monologue. So what have Europeans done to you people that you follow them like dogs, their master? What have they done to you that despise your own tongue and your own country? I cannot answer him. I'm itchy to tell him about the Cameredo experiment, but I know that if I so much as mention the name Cameredo, he'll freeze in terror, change the subject, and move away from the door of cell number 16, not on my cell number. But his talk has stung me in ways that he'll never know. That night, I sit at my desk and start the story of Waringa in Iko language. I don't know how, but the idea of a competition organized of robbers organized by the devil becomes central to Waringa adventures. It flows just like that, and for the first time since my incarceration, I feel transports of joy. That which I had always toyed with, but feared, that is writing a novel in Iko, my mother tongue, is happening before my own eyes. And I've governed toilet paper for writing material, and a government paid guard as a consultant. I'm ever willing to learn, in prison more so. And this is a novel that eventually became devil on the cross. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have time for maybe 2 questions if anybody wants to raise a hand.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for the reading. So my question has to do with memory, of course, which is inherent in writing a memoir. Last year, a former Guantanamo Bay detainee released a memoir for a second time. His first memoir had been heavily redacted, and he attempted to put it back together by memory. So my question for you is, in re-releasing this memoir some 30-odd years later, how has your memory changed? And did those altered memories affect the, excuse me, the edition that you released this time?
Yeah. First of all, it means that the main story is still the same as in the original. It is what I've done is like more like removing rather than rewriting. But there are also some other sections which I had left out in the earlier memo, like the military man a little bit, and also some other section which I did not read. There's no time. When the novel I had written is literally arrested, and for 3 weeks we don't know what to do. It was originally I found the story too complicated, so I had shortened it in the earlier memo. But now I have a whole section. I'm not going to read it, but let me see. I have a whole section called, oh yes, and this it's called Sherlock Holmes and the Strange Case of the Missing Novel. There you go.
Okay.
So what the answer is, so it's more like editing rather than it's not a rewrite. It's not. I didn't start to rewrite the memoir. It's more like editing the previous one, plus a few details here and there. Yeah. And probably editing some, like in the first memoir, I'd use the word imperial so much so that when you read it's like imperialism at every other page.
Let me take this opportunity to thank you for a quite interesting evening. I'm not from the United States, I'm from the Caribbean. So I'm also from a small so-called French Dutch island in the Caribbean.
Which one?
St. Martin.
St. Martin, okay.
And I grew up in the Netherlands, My half of my family were in France, I went to the Netherlands, but enfin. The question, I want to ask you a few questions, but the most important one would be, obviously, as an African intellectual, as an African activist, as someone who, you start out with the notion of decolonization of the mind. If you want to talk about people whose minds need to be decolonized, it's my people in the Caribbean, after what happened in Puerto Rico and stuff like that, the people should move on. But our people don't want to hear anything about that. And this leads to the question, obviously while in jail, you must have pondered, right, the irony of people like yourself who are trying to imagine, rebuild, rethink a new Africa, right, who talks about decolonization. You must have tried to figure out what happened to you, in relationship to all the dreams that came about with the Mau Mau movement, the anti-imperial movement, also in the Caribbean, obviously, et cetera, Cuba, et cetera. How this continual, in essence, failure of this system, right? How this happens. Mm-hmm. And I know that in Africa, obviously, that do you think it has to do with the fact that in our countries, and again, the Caribbean is somewhat different. The Caribbean is, to a certain extent, obviously mixed with Africa. I mean, I'm partly African myself. But that in in this situation that obviously in Africa, that you had different ways of coming to decisions, right? Consensus decisions, right? And that maybe the importation of European models of government in our parts of the world without seriously rethinking them, that may have played a role in this. I mean, one of the issues that maybe you have thought about. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Yeah. In a way, that's the question which you find in which I explore really in all my novels. You can see the progression from Weep No Child, The River Between, to when it becomes a serious question in A Grain of Wheat and Petals of Blood, to Wizard of the Crow, which I wrote in the Ngũgĩ language, by the way, which I think addresses more, the globalized world. But what I find interesting, without going to a long lecture about this, first of all, what I have always found very interesting is the parallels between, not in every detail, but between the Caribbean people's experience, African experience, African American experience, and now I'm finding even a lot more in common with Latin American people's experience in general. And you know how big an impact George Laming's novel, In the Cast of My Skin, had on me before I wrote my second novel, Weep No Child. In the Cast of My Skin is a remarkable book in every way. I don't think it's given as much credit, both nationally and internationally, as it should be, In the Cast of My Skin. And there was a time when I lived in the Caribbean world, although I'd never been there at the time, But in general, if I don't want to reduce the whole thing into one thing, but I can say, whatever else, language has played a very big part in the formation of the post-colonial societies, particularly because the impact of language on the mind of the middle class in general, right? What I find common in all colonized societies, whether it's Native American and Native New Zealanders, that's Maoris, Australia, India, Asia, Africa, is the role of language. And it's simply like this. Today, you and I, or people who are here, graduates, you can go to a university with English, and you may say, oh, I want to add another language. I know in Leeds, for instance, you could take Chinese, right? But nowhere is mandatory that for you to add Chinese or French to your English, you must first abandon English, right? It's never, that correlation is never there. You have English, yes. You can add French, you can add German, you can add Kiswahili or anything, right? And I think that's probably what's normal. But in a colonizing situation, no. The condition of acquiring the language of power, which is the colonial power language, that's English, French, Portuguese, and so on, is you are being made to either abandon your language or be humiliated about it, right? So it's not just a question of acquiring a new language, whatever its uses or not, but the other side goes with it. Despising, made to consciously, image of humiliation and negativity associated with your language. So it's almost like one language is associated with pleasure, glory. That is the language of conquest. The other language of the conquered is associated with pain, humiliation, gory, So, glory, gory, huh? Right? Right? So you want to, obviously, nobody wants pain. You know, we always like to inhabit the place of pleasure if we can, okay? Nobody walks into pain deliberately. So this is important. I don't, it will be a long lecture, so I don't go into it really, but you'll find same patterns of physical humiliation. Say Native American kids who are uprooted from their situation and taken to, you should read about one, I'm sure you've read about the Carlisle School in Pennsylvania, which was, I think, started by one Pratt, Captain Pratt, the guy, and for him it was very clear, somehow to save the Indian, he had to kill the Indian, he had a phrase which is often used. So check that, Pratt, Captain Pratt is the founder of the school, 1823 or there, middle of 19th century anyway, and it's called Carlisle, C-A-R-Y-S, and it's still there, not maybe a college now, okay? And the same pattern, you find, what? English names and abandonment of their language, and physical humiliation in the process, in relation to their names and language, okay? But guess what? The same had been argued out a long time ago, actually, into not Africa, but Ireland, because Ireland was actually one of the earliest English settlements. So let me just put on this, and I'll be very quick, I promise. I know, I'll be very quick, summarize. English settlements in Ireland, particularly in a place called Munster, M-U-N-S-T-R, okay? English settlements, At the time, Irish language was more advanced in terms of literature and other things, or even its religious literature or whatever, Many of the settlers, white English settlers who came from London, tended to acquire Irish, which displeased London. And they kept on saying, no, is the conqueror who makes the conquered acquire their land, not the other way around. So many laws are passed, including one, Kilkenny, in that 14th century anyway, in which, or earlier probably, in which actually, if somebody, and even an English person caught speaking Irish, in this English, what they call the English Pale and so on, could be punished, right? Even that was not enough. So in 1595, there's a guy called, I think you know him actually. He's called Spender. Not Spender, but, no, not Spender, but Spencer. Spencer, correct? He wrote The Fairy Queen, and he was a contemporary of Shakespeare. And by the, he was a settler. He owned a settlement in Ireland, okay? Right? And he writes this book, A View of Ireland at the Present Time. It's a dialogue between an English lord and an English settler. The English lord is visiting his friend. And they say, why is it after so many years we've not been able to tame the Irish? How can they use the phrase, how can we make them, how can we erase their memory, right? The erasure of memory. And in the conversation, they come out to simple thing. One, their names. The Irish have O's and marks. And in fact, they say in the book, if you can remove their O's and marks, they will soon forget who they are, right? The other one is language. Again, language becomes a very important fact. It's articulated. In some ways, there's a manual for how to bring about the erasure of Irish memory. Now, there's no connection between this, but a neighbor of Spencer in Munster is one called Water Alley. And as we are coming from the airport, Dallas, we pass through Virginia. I think we came through Virginia, Dallas. It's called Washington, Dallas. So you think it was in Washington, D.C. somewhere. And I thought actually it's in Virginia. So that's what told me. And I was thinking as we were coming, Virginia, oh, water rally. Oh, that guy who found Virginia. Oh, yes. And he was a neighbor of I was thinking about all these things. And water rally, and what I found. And although I don't know about Virginia, but later in a slave plantation or enslaved plantation where African people were put and so on, English and their languages were banned. Also in the Caribbean, by the way, we come to the Caribbean, banned, okay? And their names as well. They had to acquire the names of the plantation owner and so on. But the key thing, naming and language, become very important factors in the suppression of the African people, right? So we can go on this. We can go to India in 19th century, Macaulay, when he said he introduced English as a means of education, is famous. And you can Google this, Minutes on Indian Education. It's all there in there, Macaulay, M-C something, Macaulay. I mean, a bit different. Maybe, Macaulay. Yeah. Yes, yeah. But, if you look at Minutes on Indian Education, he says, we want to abolish, get rid of Persian and Sanskrit as means of education, establish English. Why? Because we must create a class of Indians. Indian in name, skin color, religion, or whatever, but with an English mind set. And he was brutally honest. He didn't say we should use it for the aesthetic purpose of saying, oh, it's so beautiful, making people speak English and so on, or creating class. No. He said we want for the practical reason that we want them to be like a buffer zone to help us in governing this vast majority. They become our allies of the mind. Of course, it doesn't always work that way, but it's all the intention. But I say, in essence, you find the same pattern in all situations, the colonizer, colonized, Always this division, conscious division between the language of the elite, which is closer to the language of the oppressing presence, and the language of the majority. For instance, let me be very quick about this. You note how, despite their languages being banned, despite their lack of access to schools, of course, not that there was much in those days anyway, the African people in the plantations still managed, out of memories of the patterns of language of their own, the one they were forced to abandon, and plus the English sounds around them, they created new languages, whether in the Caribbean or in America, right? Languages which have, when you come to think of it, have produced like the melody, the spirituals, like jazz, like hip hop, and so on, and which cultural systems which are influencing, they have made an impact on other streams, say in the Caribbean and also elsewhere. Or, for that matter, creating music from oil. You try and create a bit of music from oil. How do you do that from oil? But the Caribbean people did so. You've heard of steel drums. Huh? Steel drums were, I think, oil drums for oil. But the African drum banned in the plantation initially. The talking drum was banned. So they created something new. Now, obviously, but the whole attitude that these languages, for the educated, this language become bad English, kind of thing. Oh, bad. But it's not bad English. They are different linguistic system of communication and so on. You can learn the language of power, that's all right, but it should go hand in hand with despising the other language as well. And this, I want to say, this division of the mind of the elite in Africa or wherever there has been colonized people and so on, is really, I won't say it's everything, but it contributes to the continuous sense of almost seeking validation, almost like something never quite, even when people produce great things, they're never quite there unless somehow they find validation. Remember, the people with that kind of mindset are also policy makers. They also make political decisions. They make economic decisions and so on. So I'm not saying that language is everything, but it's one of the keys to it. And until we find a way of finding how do we empower the regular guy in Barbados, the regular guy in person in Kenya, in Uganda, in Ghana, in Nigeria, and so on, as our base. I have another book called Secure the Base, and that's what I talk about. We must secure our base and then connect to the world, because the colonial process dislocated us from our base, right? But we want to connect with and then secure the base, and then connect with the world. Let me put it this way. We can all reach the stars, right? Or possibility, but we don't have to stand at the same place, right? If there's a rainbow in the sky, you can see it from there, you can see it from here, right? But someone who pursues, no, you can't see, if you only want to see the real rainbow, you can only see it from here, where I stand. Tell them, okay, you can only see it if you come, you can also tell them to come to your base. We have to secure our base, but not become prisoners of the base. Secure the base as a way from which we can connect to the world on the basis of equal give and equal take. But just now, it's untenable how 90% of the resources of Africa, which I know better, still continue consumed in the West. How Africa is continue to be the eternal donor to the West. It's Africa which gives every single year for the last 500 years. But the trickle back in terms of aid is what, we are helping Africa. It's like someone taking 10 shots from you, and then you're shivering, and then you give one of the shots, thank you very much, you're done. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to go into all that, yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight.